The Colorado Authors League presents The Cal Zone, the League's official podcast. Welcome to a place for tasty conversation about books, art, and more, all created by members of the Colorado Authors League. Here's your host, Tricia Copeland.
I have John F. Andrews with me. He is a Colorado author and a historical fiction author. Our Desperate Hour, An American Nurse in Paris, and Dogs Don't Cry. Jump in and tell us how you started writing and why you chose historical fiction.
Well, the first writing that I did came out of ancestry research back in the 2010-2011 era when I ran into a really oddball story about a cousin of mine. My first cousin once removed, I think technically, my grandfather's cousin, who was an interesting guy, and I thought a really boring man too, when I had met him. I ran into a story about him being kidnapped by the mob in 1936. He was a surgeon working at a temperance hospital in Chicago and did not show up at home where he lived with 4 of his 5 siblings. And they started searching for him. He'd gone simply missing. They figured he'd been kidnapped, shanghaied, which was something that the mob did in those days. And the story was all over the papers from coast to coast. And then he arrived back home, told his brother about him being kidnapped. And then the next day, while he was being interviewed by the chief of police, a ransom note came in the U.S. mail that was full of fingerprints and poorly written. It looked like a fraudulent note. They never did catch the fraud writer. And then eventually the story went away in a fashion that suggested to me cover up. And I thought, that's really interesting because I didn't know about this. I asked my mother, who knew him well, purportedly. She had never heard of it. The family had just totally erased this from their memory. And I thought, I love cover-ups. So I wrote a short story, and then it turned into a novel, and that was kind of a proof of concept. And then to verify that, I wrote another novel and follow-up, and then another one. And then I wrote a novel about the guy who wrote the ransom note, the fraudulent ransom note, thinking about what kind of a poor sad sack down on his luck would figure that it's probably better to get arrested than whatever he's doing. And I imagined that character being a veteran, a disabled veteran, trying to make it in the streets of Chicago in 1936, where there was no help and there were no resources. I tried to figure out how these characters would all come together, and eventually that brought me to World War I, proposing that character was a World War I vet, and that the chief of police was his lieutenant, and that the ransom note writer had saved the lieutenant's life, putting the chief of police in a really, really difficult position. So that's kind of how these novels started. What I do is I invented a series of characters, partly based on real people and partly not. And I assembled them sort of the way you might look at a repertory theater company. And these characters trade places in starring roles in different stories. But the books that are behind me over there came out of that original kidnapping story, even though they have nothing to do with it.
It's interesting how you've just taken one little story and it's just blossomed into these side shoots of, asking questions about your characters and just inventing their backstory or their plight. The 3 books behind you, how are those character based as well? And how are they written more first person, or so it sounds like they're not really about the history of the war, but it's about these characters' lives during that time period?
Well, it's a bit of both.
Okay.
The inspiration for these books are my sons. So a number of the characters are the same as in my 1936 books. This is in essence their origin story. But when my oldest son joined the Marine Corps in 2003, I realized I knew very little about the Marine Corps. And I thought I better get to know something about the organization he was about to dive into. And so I started researching Marine Corps history, lore, mythology, ethos, and really got into it. And one of the things that I didn't know anything about was the Marine Corps role on the ground in France during World War I. And that really fascinated me because that's something they didn't teach us in school, even though I took enriched and advanced placement history and all those sorts of things. They should have said something about it, but they never did. As I did all of that, I realized that the Battle of Belleau Wood in June of 1918 was a really key event in Marine Corps history. One of the authors of one of the books behind me asserts that it's the birthplace of the modern Marine Corps. And that's historians debate that, but I would say perhaps it's the crucible in which the modern Marine Corps was forged, or maybe the fulcrum upon which Marine Corps history turned from snappy uniforms of band, embassy guards, small units on ships, to the Marine Corps we know today that can deploy an entire division. Battle of Belleau Wood was sort of the turning point. So I really got into that battle and started asking Marines what they knew about it, which was fairly little outside of historians as well. They knew about it. They knew it was a big deal. But what I wanted to do, my sons would take books on deployment with them, and when they weren't busy doing other things, they'd read. And so I started writing a book for Marines to tell them about their history of this battle. And it turned into 2 books because the first book was 800 pages long and too long to publish. Split it in half, and one half is Our Desperate Hour, and over there, Our Desperate Hour, and the other half is An American Nurse in Paris, which is that one. Two sides of the same coin, basically. The mission with all these books is to remember forgotten heroes. As I read, I learned events. I learned about people who did such extraordinary things, such heroic things with self-sacrifice and selflessness, that I took my fictional characters, some of whom are from those later books, and put them shoulder to shoulder with these heroes right in the middle of the things that they were doing that I think really draws somebody into the battle. So you can say that it's character driven, but it's also historically driven.
Okay.
Our Desperate Hour and An American Nurse track the same timeline together, and they track a very accurate historical timeline. Historical fiction, the process of writing these books involved a great deal of history research, a lot of which is behind me on the bookshelves. I literally pulled out every book I could find, every article I could find, every monograph I could find about that battle. And I particularly focused on the medical aspects of it because that's my background. Practiced medicine in Green Bay, Wisconsin for most of my career. Retired in 2016, and I had practiced pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine. So along with internal medicine as my base, I had 4 specialty areas. And I kind of fluctuated between them. I think critical care was really what I liked the most.
Interesting.
And I could relate to what the doctors in Belleau Wood were doing because I've taken care of horribly injured people, and that's what they were doing. So I could relate, and then researching the history, the medical history behind that's really quite easy for me.
obviously they didn't have the same practices and technology that we had now. And plus they were in a war zone. So then you don't have all the normal utensils and all the normal tools that you would
Yeah.
use.
One really invaluable resource are the books that are, let's see, they're over here, these dark blue, red ones. The Army Medical Department wrote up an extremely detailed, I think 12 or so volume set of books that went over every detail about how they did what they did and when they did it. And so gathering these books allowed me to really get in the heads of the doctors who were on the ground doing the care.
Right. Yeah. Like how to do trauma surgery.
How they
Yeah.
did it then.
Right.
I
Yeah.
know how we do it
Interesting.
now.
Right.
I needed to learn how they did it then. And in some cases, it was really interesting to actually see how little we had advanced in some areas and how much we'd advanced in others. So they were not dumb.
I watch a lot of medical shows, so sometimes I think I'm like know a lot about medicine, but I actually don't. I mean, you can't just go back and study MASH or something because that was too late too, right?
One good thing in my career is that I'm old enough that I had the opportunity to meet doctors who had trained under the doctors who were taking care of these guys in World War One.
Okay.
And so I got a good historical perspective on sort of the trends of 20th century medicine by getting to know doctors who trained in the 30s and who were
Okay.
trained by doctors who were trained in the teens to kind of get into the flow of things. So,
This sounds like it would take decades of research that, yeah, I can't imagine like how many books you've read just to write like, well, you said 800 pages, right?
yeah. Well, and so what I did was draw from a lot of different research angles. First, I had all my medical training and background to start as a baseline, and then all the Marine Corps research and the Marine Corps experiences. So in 2003, I became a member of the United States Marine Corps family when my son joined, and then my other son joined in 2005. So I'm a Marine Corps father two times over. And a part of the storyline in Our Desperate Hour is a father and son story,
Oh, interesting.
which is not in any way autobiographical, but is certainly taking, it's writing what you know. I know
Right.
what it's like to be a Marine Corps father, and I know what it's like to be a father of two sons who are in the same battle zone in Afghanistan, in an area that's dangerous, and how that feels on the home front. And then debriefing them as they'd come back, learning the warrior experience and the traumas, the psychic traumas that they go through.
I can imagine.
We were all
And
those together in these books.
yeah, and how did you decide what point of view are they written in, and how did you decide that point of view?
I started third person, but ultimately found that it was removing me too far from the characters' psyches, from their spirits, from their experiences. And so I rewrote them all in first person.
Okay.
So all of these three books over here are first person, uh, present tense. I felt present tense was first person present tense is probably the most immediate experience you can give a reader if you really want to draw them in and show them in real time what these characters are thinking, seeing, sensing, going through. That's the point of view that I like for that. It's not the point of view I use in every book. I use third person close as well, but these particular books are first person.
And did you publish with a traditional publisher or are you self-published?
Independently published.
Okay.
So, yeah. I had, I spent years writing queries to agents for various iterations of these books. And it's probably a good thing that none of the agents ever wrote me back or ever responded other than to say, I'll take a pass on this. So, I had zero success in interesting any agent in any of my books for probably a period of 5 or 6 years. But my writing was not as good then. And so it's probably a fortunate thing that I didn't publish back then, because when I finally did publish, I was a much better writer. And I think the books are much better as a result. Um, the Although I think it's fair to say that anybody who queries agents and sends out hundreds of query letters who has no success at all feels, yeah, like, A, why did I waste my time? That's probably my biggest feeling. B, kind of disappointed that nobody was interested in these things. But again, it gave me time to become a better writer. With all that said, I do work with an agent now who is representing American Nurse internationally. But so far, we haven't found a big publisher who's interested in that or the other stories. But what she's working with me on now is really just basically continuing on the independent approach, working on a publishing and distribution deal with Itasca Books, and creating an audiobook. We're just finishing up the audiobook for An American Nurse, and we're just going to be starting the audiobook for Our Desperate Hour. And in the meantime, she's also working with me on A Dog's Gift, which is the next book after Dogs Don't Cry.
And how do you feel like you improved your writing, and what specific things did you do to improve your writing? Was it just practice, or did you take classes, or?
Probably did what a lot of writers do, which is a little bit or a lot of bit of everything. I have a whole section you can't see down that way of books about writing. And I think one of the great things about reading a lot of books about writing is that none of them agree with each other. They all give different pieces of advice. Some of the advice is obviously not very accurate, and some of the advice is excellent. I went to writing conferences, Historical Novel Society, Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, and a number of other things. I didn't go to any camps or any guru-based things. There were more conventions where I go to a number of different talks. I'm in a critique group, and our approach in the critique group is the more you bleed in training, the less you bleed in battle. And so we're pretty honest with each other about each other's writing. And if I take a look at the group that I'm in, if you take a look at our writing at the beginning when we started, and you take a look at how we're writing now, we're much better. And I think we've helped each other become much better. So I think for anybody starting out, or anybody in the sort of their early phase, their debut phase, I really recommend reading, but not believing everything you read. Find an organization that promotes or works in the kind of genre that you're interested in. In my case, I'm in historical fiction, so Historical Novel Society was a real valuable group to join. Some of their conventions really helped me focus and sharpen my skills. Part of it is just self-discipline. Part of it is learning how to become a writer and figuring out what my own style or my own way of doing that is. And some of the characteristics that I think I have that make this work include the fact that I'm very, very patient. It took me years to write these books. That takes a lot of patience. And it also takes a lot of persistence. You got to really be persistent. You've got to have faith. Faith in yourself, faith in your product, faith in your mission. And it's really good to kind of figure out if you have a mission. A mission statement is not a bad idea. At some point in a writing career, you have to be thinking about it as a business, and a lot of businesses will have mission statements and strategic plans. I'm kind of used to doing that from my medical practice and from fire department work that I did. So, I have a mission statement and a strategic plan, and I keep it on my desk and periodically look at it and go, am I still on task? Am I still on the mission, or am I drifting? Because mission drift is pretty easy, especially if you don't have a mission statement to begin with.
Yeah, like how many books about World War One can you read?
Exactly.
Lots of them.
Exactly. But how many talk about Americans in the war? There's not that many, and that was part of what interested me in writing about World War One, is that the American experience in World War One has a fairly small volume of fiction attached to it.
John F. Andrews, thanks again for being here.
You've been listening to the Cal Zone, the official podcast of the Colorado Authors League, supporting and promoting its creative community since 1931. Learn more about us at coloradoauthors.org. This is a production of the nonprofit Colorado Authors League.